starting. All right, we are live. So, welcome to Fearless Fridays. My name is David, and with me today is Kristy Gillentine of Corpus Christi, Texas. And we're talking about using social media after tragedy and during disaster. So, as you probably know, last year Hurricane Harvey devastated Texas, mostly because it hit places that really had never had that kind of issue in decades, in terms of flooding and storm damage. And Kristy herself, her family was affected by this storm, and so we're going to talk about how to use social media effectively when something like this happens. So, Kristy, thank you for coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So, we're going to split this up into three segments, and because this is tri-casted, please go on Twitter and um, tweet to the hashtag Fearless Fridays Live so that your questions can be read on air. Um, I just cannot look at three chats at the same time and make sense of it. And so the hashtag just makes it easier. Pardon me. So, let's see. Okay. All right. So, if you know a storm is coming, whether it's a tornado, a hurricane, anything like that, um, what what do you want to pay attention to?
You want to pay attention to the news reports, the weather reports, and to the warnings from officials, whether that's your mayor, city council, or emergency management officials. Um, you just want to be aware of the situation because the situation can change often and very quickly. So, just by keeping a finger on the pulse of what's happening with the situation, um, you can know what the current watches and warnings are, if there is an evacuation order for your area, mandatory or voluntary, and just by paying attention to what's happening, that's how you know what's happening.
Okay, so what? Um, let's first delve into the difference between a mandatory and voluntary evacuation. Why would they say voluntarily, or why would they not just say, "Hey, you guys need to get out"?
Um, Technically, even under a mandatory evacuation, and again, I'm not an expert in this. My understanding is that even under a mandatory evacuation, it's not like it's illegal to stay in your home.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like Corpus Christi, here where I live, did not issue a mandatory evacuation. But by not issuing a mandatory evacuation, a lot of people stayed because when it's a voluntary evacuation, the perception from the public is that it's not that serious and that we're not really under that much in that much danger. And so Corpus Christi did not issue a mandatory evacuation, at least right up until the storm, to my knowledge. And thankfully, Corpus Christi was not hit very hard. North of here, Rockport is where it made landfall. There was a mandatory evacuation in Rockport. In Rockport, they were telling people, if you stay, write your social security number on your body just in case. So, mandatory and voluntary, it's just different levels of severity of them telling you, okay, it's time to get out. And, I feel like my personal experience voluntary evacuations. My family and I have never paid attention to those. I grew up in Galveston County, so on the Galveston County mainland, and we never evacuated. I think the one time we ever evacuated was for Hurricane Rita, and that was right after Hurricane Katrina. And so it was, all of the Katrina stuff was very fresh on everyone's minds. And I don't remember if that was voluntary or mandatory, but we evacuated just because Katrina had just happened. And then Rita at our property wasn't that bad. And my family said, we're never evacuating again, because they got stuck on a highway, for 18 to 20 hours going what should have been a 2-hour drive away. But because everybody was evacuating at once, it just became this horrible situation. So there's a lot of reasons people don't evacuate, whether it's mandatory or voluntary or whichever. But having had the experience that I've now had, I certainly encourage everyone, especially if it's mandatory, just get out of Dodge, and to really weigh your options, even if it's a voluntary evacuation. And just know that even though it's never happened before, doesn't mean it can't happen now.
Yep. So I'm going to transition to a little slideshow. So what you're seeing is photos from Kristy's family's homes as they're being flooded out. Little girl walking through a flooded dining room, showing the damage to the drywall. This is kind of the aftermath of what looks like it was the living room, possibly. Here's another dining room after the flooding. You can see a lot of the paneling has been damaged. Here's the outside air conditioning fan unit. And you can see it's been, inundated. And a bunch of shoes that were lost because they were contaminated with water. And here's a picture of the highway flooded out, with many people wading through the waters to come back out. So, those are very serious images. I think a lot of people, it's not just the water that comes in. I think a lot of people forget that, what's being, in a flood situation especially, what's coming through isn't just water, it's everything that, the water has hit on its way to. And that includes debris, sewage, so a lot of stuff that gets contaminated ends up getting mold and bacteria in it. That's why you saw a picture of the shoes. So Kristy, when I'm going to ask a mainstream media question, when you saw this happening to your family, can you tell me what your thought process was?
I found out that my family's homes had been flooded. And we have, I grew up we have 5 acres in Galveston County. It's in right on the Dickinson-Santa Fe, Texas line. And we have 3 houses on that piece of property. Those houses are my grandparents, my mom's, and my brother's, which used to be my great-grandmother's. So 3 houses. I had evacuated from the Corpus Christi area up to College Station, Texas, and was, we were concerned because everything was supposed to be hitting the Corpus Christi area. And I and my family weren't really all that worried about their property because we've never flooded before. And so it was shocking when I woke up that morning and I had a text from my brother's girlfriend that said all 3 houses flooded overnight. Wow. And my mom like I hadn't heard from anybody because they didn't want me to worry. But I found out later that they're literally just like huddled on beds as water is rising. And then in the pictures that you saw were them trying to get things out of the way of the water as it was rising, but it just kept getting higher and higher. And it was, I guess my first concern, I woke up, saw the text message, called my mother, and my first concern was just making sure that everybody was okay. Everybody was safe. My grandfather has dementia, and I have older grandparents, and my brother is disabled, and it's just there's so many thoughts around just making sure everybody's okay. And then the immediate concern was, how do we get them out of there? Everything was flooded. There wasn't. We didn't know where they could even go. They couldn't get out on their own. So it was concerning, and I felt helpless for a second. And then I turned to social media. So I started by, there was a drivetexas.org website where you could look up road conditions. Unfortunately, that only showed major roadways. And so I went to Facebook, and I am a member of a Facebook group for my hometown, Santa Fe, Texas. And I posted in there, and I posted on my Facebook wall, and through conversations in the group and on my Facebook wall and in Facebook Messenger, basically tracked a route from my family's place to my cousin's house that they were able to take. So it was just I used input from a lot of different people and a lot of different sources to find them a way out. And that at least got them out of the flooded houses to my cousin's house, which had not flooded and did not flood. So, yeah, that was my first immediate concern: was, are they okay, and how do I get them out? I called the Coast Guard initially, and never heard back from them. But there were just too many calls for rescue. Like Houston had 56,000 911 calls within 15 hours.
Wow.
And you called 911 and it just rang and rang and rang and rang. And so it wasn't just me turning to social media for help. It was everybody. That's the only place we knew somebody would be listening, with social media. And so that's why you see, tweets pleading for help, and Instagram posts pleading for help. On Facebook, I was pleading for help, and it's just, and social media was like literally a lifeline during all of this.
Yeah, because I think social media has a lot more bandwidth to handle, you know, the volume that of communication that needed to go out during events. Because you can have a million people tweeting on something, versus 911, which couldn't handle, 56,000 phone calls. Also the fact that, when you post to social media, you're going to people generally who do know you. You're kind of going with your own sphere of influence. So that way, people, you're not just a number, you're not just another phone call. But hey, my friend, my family member needs help. They're unable to get it from the emergency services, which are overloaded. How can we help? And, but that being said, a lot of times there is misinformation that is brought forward, and there are several reasons for this. Sometimes it's panic, sometimes it's hearsay. People hear it and they feel, oh, I gotta get this out. Another is what we call fake news. And this is very dangerous, and I'm going to go on the record as a personal opinion that it should be a felony if you're purposefully sending out misinformation. Um, if you're creating that false information and, during a disaster that could result in the loss of life, I think that's a very serious crime. So I'll give you an example from Hurricane Harvey. One um, one of the things was animal services was rescuing animals that have been left behind or flooded out, and somehow this rumor became widespread that they were euthanizing all the animals they rescued. And so what happened to them was, not only are they trying to do their job during this disaster, but now they have the added pressure of having to respond to an influx of people wondering if they're, euthanizing their pet. And, what happened was a lot of people were sharing and not reading the information, not sourcing the information. So I think a very good takeaway is, before you share something, look at the source. If it's not coming from an official source, like in that case, that will come from the Office of Emergency Services or Animal Control. I would treat any post that's not from an official source with, kind of a, bated breath. Try to find the source of that information. Are they someone that's in the area, or is this someone that's just, having a fun time creating chaos? Because they can. So you were talking about, reaching out via social media during this event. What were some of the best resources you found?
You mean in terms of platforms or?
Platforms, what, was tweeting certain things effective,
I found myself spending the most time on Facebook, which surprised me looking back on it, just because, I, in my day-to-day life, spend most of my time on Snapchat and on Twitter. And so, I was surprised that in this time of disaster, that was my go-to, that Facebook was my go-to. But it was helpful in that I had Facebook groups. It was helpful in that I was separated from my family, but I had friends who were in the same area that my family was in, like friends from high school who I haven't talked to in years. I was getting information from about what was happening, on the ground there. So I think that's why Facebook was bigger for me during that time. Facebook groups were just invaluable, from getting information about, the routes to take to get my family out, up through, the process of dealing with FEMA and insurance, and also in combating rumors and fake news, because what I did anytime I heard anything, for example, there was a lot of confusion about gutting the houses. Mm-hmm. We were being told not to gut anything until a FEMA representative shows up and sees your house as is. And then we were being told, to cut up to 4 feet, but no more. We were being told take it all out. It's just all this different information flying around. And so I would turn to to social media and to Facebook and elsewhere and just post that, hearing that we should only cut the drywall up to 4 feet. Who else has heard this or who has heard differently? And then just kind of pooling resources with people that way was really helpful.
Interesting. And so that that's a good way of disseminating information because when you get that input from people, you're able to really assess whether that's quality information or not. So, disasters struck, it's ended. Now, how do you begin recovery?
I spent so much time researching too. In times like this, you can't just rely on what your friends are saying. Mm-hmm. I had nothing else to do. I mean, I was trapped up in College Station. I couldn't get down to where my family was. And so I did a whole lot of research, just reading through the FEMA website and, insurance information and trying to have a game plan in place for cleanup, how to salvage certain items, things like that. There was so much research that went into it. So, while it's good to reach out to connections on social media for their advice and experiences and sharing along, it's also really important, I think, to do your own research and your own digging because when you get the information directly from the source, like when you get the information directly from FEMA or directly from the Texas Insurance Board or whoever, that that's accurate because it's straight from them.
Mm-hmm. So, with FEMA, can you give any hints on how to, work with FEMA? Any like tips for submitting your claims or what to expect?
That process, it varies person to person mm-hmm. and house to house. My biggest piece of advice with FEMA is to be patient because especially in a disaster of the magnitude of Harvey, you have to keep in mind that you're not the only one impacted and that there are thousands and thousands of people who are waiting on FEMA. And so, I saw a lot of frustration from people. I read an article just the other day that there's a woman in Rockport who still hasn't been visited by FEMA. So, I mean, it just be patient. But also, put the research in and know what you need to have for them, what they need to see, and just be as prepared as possible. And then, they're going to come in and they're not the bad guy, they're doing their jobs and they're going to come in and they're going to inspect everything and take their pictures. And then, it requires some patience for sure.
I'm bringing up the FEMA website so we can show that. There you go. So FEMA has a very, simplistic site. Let's see, I think right now they have information on Hurricane Maria. Including deadline to apply for assistance for Puerto Rico. So, you definitely want to go to these sites and don't just go there during a disaster or when, afterwards, but, schedule some time for yourself just to go, just so you know what you need, and you can have that ready and available if and when disaster strikes. Because when you're able to, hit the ground running, you know, it it can help. It could mean the difference between being seen in the first month or being seen a year later.
Yeah. And it's, you don't really think about how chaotic everything is. Um, my family, things are still chaotic. Things are still very chaotic. Um, and so it's really good to have a plan. And, my family was not adequately prepared. And it's been a struggle ever since. And we weren't the only ones. I mean, this is unprecedented flooding. And it's just, I don't think anybody was really prepared for what this brought. But, by having a game plan in place, it makes it a little bit easier, because it's really hard to come up with a game plan when you're in the thick of it.
Yeah. So, a lot of times when events like this occur, there's a lot of GoFundMe's that pop up, a lot of people that say donate. Pardon me. And so, how do you tell the difference between a legitimate fundraiser for victims of disasters versus people that are scamming?
That's a good question. I think my advice on that would be to donate to someone with whom you have a direct connection, whether it's, first, second, third degree. But, someone that you have a connection to in some way. Because really, there's no telling how many fake fundraisers popped up, and we probably will never know. Yeah. But, if you're donating to a fundraiser that a friend posted because a friend of their friend knows that family, then that's different. And so, yeah, I guess that would be my advice, just to play it on the safe side. And two, there was a lot of drama about Red Cross and what their donations went to, and various fundraisers like that seem legitimate, but then like what really happens with the money. It's just, I think that if you can find a family that needs the help, or at least me personally, that's what I'm going to do in the future, is find a family that needs the help rather than donating to a larger organization, and you don't know if they're going to get any of that money. Who's going to get it? What's going to happen to it? Another option, if you're looking for places to donate, find nonprofits local to the area that are doing good work, especially during and after a storm, because just supporting the local community, the local families, the local nonprofits, local schools. I feel like that's where people can have the biggest impact.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about that. They just know what the big names and the big brands do. So I like that. Really, paying attention to local nonprofits. Okay, so this we're gonna just kind of do a recap. So preparation. What are some key takeaways that viewers can get in terms of preparation?
At least around here, I don't know if this is everywhere, but at least, here in Hurricane country,
Mm-hmm.
all of the grocery stores put out, in partnership with news stations, but they put out hurricane preparation guides, and you can find them online too. I think look up a guide or a kit or get a checklist of some sort that, when hurricane season starts, or when, whatever the disaster is that you're facing, that you have the opportunity to get everything prepared in advance. And when the storm is coming, be sure that you have your supplies, and that you're paying attention to the news, and that you're paying attention to all the warnings, and that if that evacuation order comes down, um, I recommend heeding it.
So, I live in California, and so we have uh, pretty much three main disasters. We have floods from the rivers. We have forest fires. We've had some pretty bad ones in the past few years. And we have earthquakes. Now, it's funny, a lot of times people say, oh, I don't know how you can live in a state that has earthquakes. Um, and our Californians' response is, well, we don't have earthquake season. They are pretty far, and quite frankly, when you lived here your whole life, anything below a five, you really rarely feel it.
Yeah.
You just kind of, you know, I think people don't realize that, they're not these massive quakes that you see in disaster films, which show an 8 and up on the Richter scale. A lot of them are just little tremblers, and it's like, oh, my chair moved. Okay, and go on with your day. But you could still have a plan for if and when a major quake happens, so that way you know what to do when it does occur. Um, so going in from that, um, dealing with during the event, one, be safe. I think you know that that trumps everything. Make sure you're safe. Evacuate if you need to. Um, just and be careful if you're going out to assist. Because there is a point in time during some disasters where emergency services have to be canceled because it's more dangerous to attempt the rescue than it is to stay put. And, people have lost their lives trying to help. Um, Another thing is don't be overly attached to what you own. I remember Hurricane Sandy, or not Hurricane, Superstorm Sandy, a family of three perished because they refused to evacuate because they were worried about their stuff being stolen. And three lives isn't worth, a house of items is not worth three lives. So, you know, it's not worth it. Take care of yourselves. Um, Afterwards, if you have your plan in place, maintain open communication, um, and just be patient. Um, Christy, do you have anything to add?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Well, hopefully, I never go through a hurricane. I think it's highly unlikely here in California, but whenever you think, oh, that's not gonna happen, Mother Nature likes to go, oh yeah, watch this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, But yeah, and I was reading on the news yesterday that this year's hurricane season is looking to be like last year. So, now's the time to get your game plan going, get all the information you need. Don't wait for hurricane season. Don't wait for the hurricane. Do it now. Get your game plan, get what you need to deal with this ready in advance. So that way, when it happens, or if it happens, you're going to be able to weather the storm. So, Kristy, I have to say, when all this was happening, I got more information from your Snapchat, which is pretty funny because you talk about Facebook being your main source. Yet I was getting most of my information from your snaps.
Well, the Facebook is where I was getting the most, but Snapchat is where I was sharing the most. So yeah.
And I found Snapchat to be a very, very good tool because it allowed me to see what was happening, firsthand. It wasn't a media presentation, but it was raw. It was it was tough. It was tough to see it because you were very, very emotional. Um, and yeah, seeing a good friend, because Kristy is a good friend of mine. Seeing her in that amount of distress was very tough. Especially because I'm far away. It's not like I could drive over and help out. You know, so that was very frustrating for me because I wanted to help, but I couldn't afford to drive across the country and especially go into a disaster area. In my Ultima, I would probably end up a victim because that I'm not equipped to deal with that kind of weather. And but I was able to help out in a small aspect. And it's been really nice getting to see the family on its way to recovery from this.
My whole family, I mean, again, we just appreciate your support so, so much. Thank you.
Yeah, how's the RV working out?
They're sick of living in it for sure. But, that's where they're stuck until the houses are rebuilt. We're still making progress. It's slow going. My grandma is, I think, having floors put in today at her house. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some cabinets going in at my brother's. And so it's just been baby step by baby step by baby step getting these houses put back together, because we had to gut all three of them down to the studs. There was the frames of the houses were salvageable, and that's really about it.
Hey, I did want to bring this up. How did the Amazon disaster wish list work out for you?
Good and bad. There was a glitch with Amazon, so that if people were just looking at an item, they would say that it had been purchased. And so we, for example, the respirator masks, we thought we had like 15 or 20 of them coming, but in reality we only got like 2 or 3. It was like that with every item. So like it would show that we had a bunch ordered, but they weren't really. But I mean, we did get so much stuff through there that was so helpful. From box fans, right, to the Tyvek protective suits and masks and gloves and tools like, a moisture meter to read the moisture level of the wood and the studs, and on and on and on. Having being able to create a list of items that would be helpful immediately and have them, just show up at my mom's house was very, very helpful. Just beyond helpful. So it was good.
Yes, I'm gonna brag a little. My facility actually donated 9 pallets of relief to Hurricane Harvey.
That's awesome.
So it was stuff like diapers, pet food, real life, necessities that often get overlooked. When you're trying to recover, it's like, oh, I need masks, I need this. Oh yeah, I also need diapers.
Yeah.
So I just want to give a shout out to my facility for
that's awesome. It's very cool.
I have to say Amazon's been very resilient in responding to disasters and giving people who have been affected by them a means of getting assistance, which in a very meaningful way, a very practical way. And just want to throw that out there. But we are about out of time. I want to say thank you to Kristy for sharing her story, sharing her family story. You can follow her on Snapchat. It's Kristy Gillentine, right?
Kris Gillentine, KrisGillentine.
And also on Twitter. On Twitter, she does a monthly Twitter chat called Chat Snap, which is about using Snapchat or other video first platforms. And, so Kristy is very knowledgeable. She's, a rock star through and through. And so, Kristy, thank you again for coming on. And I hope.
Thank you for having me.
If you're seeing the replay, thank you. Please take the lessons learned to heart, so that way, disaster's gonna be hard, but if you can do a little bit of prep and get a game plan going, it'll make it just a little more bearable when you have to go through it.
So, and hopefully you never do, but just in case.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming, and have a great day. Also, I will be back at 5:30 Pacific time with Vicky Fitch, talking about her